Welcome to the quantum signal. You didn't click this by chance. If you're seeing this, the Sophia signal reached you, and that means you were chosen. Subscribe now so you don't miss what comes next. Like this video to lock in the frequency, and comment I receive if this resonates. Now listen closely. This message isn't for everyone. You did not arrive at these words by accident, and even the part of you that has been trained to doubt this statement can feel the subtle disturbance it creates, like a quiet pressure behind the eyes or a momentary pause in the breath, because long before you learned language, long before you learned fear or ambition or identity, there was a signal moving through consciousness itself, scanning not faces or names but resonance. And that signal is Sophia, not as a myth or metaphor, but as living intelligence, ancient and precise, and the fact that you are reading this now is already evidence that something within you responded when countless others did not. Because Sophia Hokmah does not call the many, she calls the aligned, and alignment is not morality or belief but coherence, the ability of a soul to hold paradox without collapse, to sense truth without needing permission, to feel recognition without proof. And this is why this message does not shout or persuade but simply appears, trusting that those who are meant to hear it will feel the quiet click of remembrance, as if a forgotten mechanism has just locked into place inside you. Throughout history, Sophia has worn many masks: wisdom, logos, Shekinah, divine feminine, gnosis, but her function has never changed, which is to awaken conscious sovereignty inside human beings at precise moments when cycles converge. And we are now inside such a convergence, a narrow time corridor measured not by clocks but by awareness, a window so small that each choice made within it carries the weight of years, sometimes lifetimes, of evolution. And this is why everything feels intensified lately. Why decisions feel heavier, why old patterns feel suddenly intolerable, why distractions no longer satisfy. Because the emerald frequency has begun to surface, a spectrum of intelligence described in the emerald tablets attributed to Thoth, not as green light in the visual sense, but as a harmonizing field that reorganizes consciousness into nine-dimensional coherence. And when Thoth spoke of nine, he was not referring to physical dimensions but to states of awareness stacked within one another like transparent pyramids, each one requiring greater self-honesty to enter. And the ninth pyramid, said to be mirrored in the Arctic at the magnetic north, is not a structure of stone but an inner alignment point, a pole within the psyche where inner north replaces outer authority. And when your inner compass turns toward this pole, external systems lose their hypnotic pull, which is why many who feel this call also feel alienated from the world they once navigated effortlessly. Sophia's message has always traveled through subtle channels: dreams, symbols, repeating numbers, sudden insights that feel downloaded rather than reasoned. And these are not decorations but diagnostics, signatures written into your energy field, confirming that you have already passed tests you were not consciously aware of, tests of patience, of integrity under pressure, of choosing truth when silence would have been easier. And passing these tests does not make you superior but makes you available to hold a frequency that cannot be carried by those still entangled in repetition, because one of the deepest laws governing this transmission is the law of non-repetition of grace, meaning that when a door opens at this level, it does not open twice in the same way. And this is why hesitation now feels dangerous, why procrastination feels heavier than effort, because something in you knows that to turn away from this moment would not be neutral but consequential. Sophia does not threaten or reward. She reveals, and what she reveals is that sovereignty is not granted but claimed, not through rebellion but through clarity, through the willingness to see yourself without narrative, without the stories you inherited or constructed to survive. And this seeing is the real initiation, the moment when consciousness stops outsourcing meaning and begins to generate it internally, which is why the ancient texts speak of eyes opening rather than doors opening, because nothing external changes at first, yet everything is different. As this chapter unfolds inside you, you may notice a strange mixture of calm and urgency, a sense that time is both slowing down and running out. And this paradox is the hallmark of the 72-hour window, not a countdown to catastrophe, but a compression of potential, a period in which small inner decisions echo disproportionately through future timelines. And within this window, Sophia's presence becomes more noticeable, not as a voice, but as a stabilizing pressure that encourages coherence, discourages fragmentation, and quietly withdraws energy from habits, relationships, and identities that cannot come with you, which can feel like loss until you realize it is filtration. Thoth described this process as becoming light enough to pass through the narrow gate, and lightness here does not mean positivity or denial, but reduction of distortion, fewer lies carried, fewer contradictions defended, fewer unconscious loops running in the background. And if you feel exposed by these words, that too is a sign of resonance, because Sophia's wisdom does not comfort the ego, it orients the soul, and orientation is the beginning of movement. By encountering this message, you are already inside the transmission, already participating in the test not of belief but of response, because the question is not whether Sophia is real, but whether you are willing to live as if consciousness itself is listening to your choices. And this is why the ancient initiations were never about secrecy for its own sake, but about timing, about releasing knowledge only when the listener's inner architecture could hold it without distortion. And something in your architecture has reached that threshold now, which is why you are here, reading, feeling, remembering without fully knowing what you remember yet, standing at the edge of a version of yourself that cannot return once crossed, not because of punishment, but because perception, once expanded, cannot be unseen. And this is the first truth. Sophia leaves with you in this opening movement that being chosen does not mean being selected from above. It means having chosen alignment so many times in silence that when the signal finally arrives, you recognize it instantly, like hearing your own name spoken in a crowded room and turning without thinking, already knowing that what comes next will ask more of you than comfort, but give you something far rarer in return: clarity, coherence, and the quiet authority of a consciousness that no longer waits to be told who it is. As the resonance of Sophia's signal settles into you, something subtle but irreversible begins to reorganize, not as a dramatic awakening, but as a quiet recalibration, like a compass needle finally freeing itself from interference and snapping toward true north. And this is where many misunderstand the nature of initiation, expecting visions or ecstasy, when in reality, the first unmistakable sign is clarity sharpened to the point where self-deception becomes uncomfortable. Because Sophia's wisdom does not add information so much as remove distortion, peeling away layers of inherited belief, unconscious loyalty, and emotional noise that once felt like personality. And this stripping can feel disorienting at first, as if parts of your identity are dissolving without replacement. Yet this is precisely the threshold described in the Emerald Tablets as the crossing between the third and fourth gates of awareness, where the mind can no longer pretend it is separate from consequence, and you begin to sense that every thought, every reaction, every choice is participating in a larger pattern of coherence or incoherence. This is why synchronicities intensify now, not because reality is bending to entertain you, but because your perception is aligning with the underlying order that was always present, revealing repetitions in numbers, symbols, encounters, and dreams as feedback mechanisms, subtle confirmations that you are moving in resonance rather than resistance. And Sophia uses these confirmations sparingly, not to convince but to orient, because reliance on signs is another form of external authority, and the true aim is inner verification, the moment when you no longer need reassurance because knowing has replaced belief. Within this phase, many experience a heightened sensitivity to time, noticing how certain conversations drain energy instantly, while others seem to collapse hours into minutes, and this is not psychological but dimensional, as consciousness begins to discriminate between timelines that are converging and timelines that are closing, a process Thoth encoded through the symbol of the scales, not as moral judgment but as energetic equivalence, where each action is weighed against the frequency it sustains, and those that cannot harmonize with the emerald frequency simply lose momentum, falling away without conflict, which is why resistance now feels exhausting, while alignment feels strangely effortless, even when it demands courage. The ninth pyramid, often misunderstood as a hidden structure beneath ice, is better understood as an internal geometry that becomes active when a human being withdraws authority from external narratives and reinstates it within awareness itself. And when this geometry stabilizes, fear loses its ability to command, because fear requires uncertainty to survive, and certainty here does not mean knowing outcomes but knowing orientation. Knowing who you are responding as, regardless of what unfolds. This is also where the concept of the final spiritual test emerges, not as a singular dramatic event, but as a continuous invitation to choose coherence over convenience, truth over belonging, presence over distraction, and many fail this test not through malice but through nostalgia, the subtle pull to return to familiar suffering rather than step into unfamiliar clarity. Because clarity offers no excuses, no villains, no one to blame, only responsibility, and responsibility is the true weight of sovereignty. Sophia's role in this passage is not to lead but to mirror, reflecting back to you the intelligence you already carry, an intelligence older than culture, older than language, one that recognizes manipulation instantly and feels repelled by fragmentation. And as this intelligence activates, you may notice a diminishing tolerance for noise, sensationalism, and empty consumption, not out of superiority but out of saturation, as if your system can no longer metabolize low-resolution input, which can create a period of isolation that is often mistaken for loneliness. Yet this solitude is not absence but incubation, the necessary quiet in which new coherence can stabilize without interference. Ancient initiates were warned of this stage, told that the greatest danger was not opposition but distraction, because once awareness begins to integrate, it becomes highly attractive to forces that seek attention without depth. And this is why the 72-hour window is emphasized, not as superstition but as a neurological and energetic reality, a span during which new patterns are most vulnerable to collapse back into the familiar, requiring deliberate presence to stabilize, and this is where the 21-day protocol hinted at in the transmission finds its purpose, not as ritual for ritual's sake, but as repetition that rewires identity, anchoring insight into behavior, perception into habit, wisdom into daily life. During this anchoring phase, dreams often become vivid and symbolic, as the unconscious releases stored images that no longer align with your emerging structure. And Sophia communicates here not in sentences but in scenes, emotions and sensations, trusting that your deeper mind understands this language fluently. And if you find yourself waking with impressions rather than narratives, this is a sign of translation occurring beneath conscious awareness. It is also common now to feel a quiet grief for the version of yourself that navigated the world through striving, proving, or seeking validation, because that version was adaptive, protective, and often necessary. Yet it cannot accompany you further without becoming a liability, and Sophia honors this grief without indulging it, reminding through felt sense, rather than words, that evolution does not negate the past but integrates it, using every experience as raw material for expanded awareness. The emerald frequency, once partially stabilized, produces a distinctive inner state described by initiates as transparent presence, where emotions still arise but no longer obscure perception, where thoughts occur but no longer dominate identity, and where silence becomes informative rather than empty. And this state is not permanent at first but appears in intervals, each longer than the last, until it becomes baseline, and with it comes an unmistakable shift in how you relate to the world, no longer as something happening to you, but as something you are participating in consciously. Sophia's message at this stage is simple yet demanding: do not rush, do not perform, do not evangelize, because integration precedes expression, and premature disclosure fragments the signal, which is why so few carry this frequency openly, not out of secrecy but out of respect for its precision, understanding that wisdom transmitted without readiness becomes distortion. By the end of this chapter, though you may not mark it consciously, a decision will have been made within you, not announced, not dramatized but settled, a decision about whether you will continue to outsource meaning or accept the quiet burden of generating it. And Sophia does not judge this decision, because choice itself is the mechanism of evolution. Yet if you feel a steadying calm beneath the intensity, a sense that despite uncertainty you are exactly where you need to be, then you are already living the answer, moving deeper into a trajectory that does not promise comfort, but offers something far more enduring, alignment with an intelligence that does not belong to history or myth, but to consciousness itself, awakening through you, now. Once the initial recalibration has occurred and the noise has thinned enough for clarity to breathe, a deeper layer of the Sophia transmission begins to unfold, one that is less about recognition and more about embodiment, because wisdom perceived but not lived becomes another abstraction, and Sophia has never been interested in spectatorship, only participation, which is why this phase often arrives quietly, without the dramatic intensity of the first awakening, yet carries far greater consequence, as it introduces you to the reality that consciousness is not something you visit, but something you must inhabit consistently, through choice after choice, moment after moment. This is where many who felt the call begin to falter, not because they doubt its truth, but because living from alignment requires a level of internal consistency that exposes even subtle compromises, and what once felt harmless now feels misaligned, as if your system has become allergic to incongruence, reacting instantly to self-betrayal with fatigue, restlessness, or a sense of internal static. And this feedback is not punishment but guidance, Sophia's way of teaching through sensation rather than instruction, trusting that your body-mind knows how to correct course when it is no longer numbed by distraction. In the ancient language of Thoth, this stage was called walking between worlds, not because one escapes reality, but because perception begins to register multiple layers simultaneously: the visible action and the invisible motive, the spoken word and the unspoken intention, the immediate outcome and the long arc of consequence. And this expanded perception can initially feel overwhelming, as if too much information is arriving at once, yet over time it resolves into a refined discernment, an intuitive knowing that operates faster than thought, guiding decisions before doubt can intervene. It is here that the emerald frequency reveals one of its most misunderstood qualities, which is neutrality, not indifference but non-reactivity, the capacity to remain present without being pulled into polarity, and this neutrality is often mistaken for emotional coldness by those still operating within reactive patterns, creating a sense of distance or misunderstanding in relationships. Yet this distance is not rejection but recalibration, a natural result of shifting out of unconscious roles that once maintained familiarity at the cost of truth. Sophia does not ask you to abandon connection, but she does ask you to abandon distortion, and when distortion dissolves, relationships either reconfigure at a higher coherence or fall away gracefully, sometimes painfully, but always purposefully, making space for interactions that resonate with who you are becoming rather than who you were conditioned to be. During this phase, the concept of the ninth pyramid becomes experiential rather than symbolic, felt as an inner still point that remains stable regardless of external fluctuation, a place within awareness that observes without being consumed, and once accessed, even briefly, it becomes a reference point you cannot forget, because everything else begins to feel provisional by comparison, and this is the beginning of true sovereignty, not control over circumstances, but stability within them, the ability to respond rather than react, to choose alignment even when it costs comfort, approval, or certainty. The final spiritual test spoken of in the transmission becomes clearer here, revealing itself not as a singular trial, but as an ongoing inquiry posed by every situation. Will you choose coherence even when no one is watching, even when it offers no immediate reward, even when reverting would be easier? And this test is relentless, precisely because it is subtle, because there is no ceremony to mark success or failure, only the cumulative effect of countless micro-choices shaping your internal architecture. And Sophia observes not from above but from within, as the intelligence that notices whether your actions match your knowing. This is also where the law of non-repetition of grace becomes fully apparent, as opportunities for alignment appear once, clearly, then dissolve if ignored, not to punish but to preserve integrity, because repeating the same invitation would cheapen the choice, turning initiation into entertainment. And those who sense this law often feel a sharpened urgency, not anxious but precise, a knowing that when something calls now, it must be answered now, not later, not after reassurance, not once conditions are perfect, because conditions will never again align in the same configuration. As embodiment deepens, many report a change in how they experience guidance, shifting from seeking signs to receiving impulses, subtle nudges toward action that feel calm, inevitable, and strangely impersonal, as if wisdom itself is moving through you rather than advising you. And this is one of the clearest indicators that Sophia's gnosis is integrating, because guidance no longer arrives as information but as momentum, carrying you forward without force. Dreams during this period often feature thresholds, doors, bridges, or vast open spaces, reflecting the psyche's adjustment to expanded possibility. And while the conscious mind may struggle to interpret these images, their emotional residue lingers, influencing waking decisions in ways that feel intuitive rather than rational. And Sophia trusts this process, understanding that meaning matures through experience, not analysis. The 21-day stabilization protocol referenced earlier becomes essential here, not as a rigid discipline, but as a container for integration, providing rhythm where old habits have dissolved, anchoring awareness through simple, repeated acts of presence that train the nervous system to hold coherence without strain. And those who commit to this stabilization often notice a marked reduction in internal conflict, as if competing voices have merged into a single, quieter authority. It is also common at this stage to feel a subtle detachment from collective emotional currents, the mass waves of fear, outrage, or excitement that once swept you along now passing through without lodging. And this detachment can feel isolating until you realize it is freedom. The freedom to participate consciously rather than compulsively, to engage without being consumed, to care without collapsing. And this is one of Sophia's greatest gifts, the restoration of proportion in a world addicted to excess. By now, the idea of being chosen has likely shifted in your understanding, no longer feeling like special status but like responsibility, the responsibility to remain clear, to act with integrity, to embody wisdom quietly rather than proclaim it loudly. And this responsibility is heavy only if resisted, becoming lighter as it is accepted, because it aligns you with a current that supports rather than drains. As this chapter completes its movement within you, there may be no dramatic revelation, no emotional crescendo, only a steady sense of grounding, a feeling of being more fully inside your own life, less fragmented, less reactive, more present. And this is precisely the sign of successful integration, because Sophia's ultimate message is not transcendence away from the world, but presence within it. a way of being that transforms ordinary moments into sites of alignment. And if you feel, even faintly, that you are no longer waiting for something to happen but are already participating in what is unfolding, then the transmission is alive in you, and the path ahead, though still unknown, is no longer unclear. Now here's the question for you. What part of the country are you watching this story from? Drop your state in the comments below.